Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to Business Today.
Good evening, Denver, and good evening to the viewers at home, within the country and outside the country as well.
Indeed. Let me just throw this out to both of you first, just to get the conversation going. Foot and mouth disease, really not something new. It's quite cyclical in the region. But then why is it this time so serious, and what makes this different from previous outbreaks that we've had? Mr. Mbai, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you once again for hosting us.
Indeed.
So first of all, FMD is a disease of economic importance. Basically, what one can look at is the possible, negative trickle-down effects on the economy as a whole.
Right.
And of course, also to look at the possibilities of, how we can manage this disease so that we can reduce the impacts and protect the interests of all the value chain, actors within the agricultural sector in Namibia.
Indeed, indeed. Mr. Salobo, maybe you just like to join us as far as why is this current foot and mouth disease outbreak in South Africa so cumbersome? Why is it such a worry for the entire region?
Good evening, gentlemen, and everyone that is joining us in this conversation. I think, Mr. Baez put it nicely in here on just the economic framing of it. But I think what makes this time around differently is the scale of it. As we talk now today in South Africa, we have over 27,000 cases that are in a range of provinces across the country. So in the past, Denver, we had the foot and mouth disease, but it will be quickly contained within a particular region because you don't want it to spread so wide because of the very same economic impact that Mr. Mbai was talking about. But I think what worries us a lot this time around is the scale at which it has spread, but also the fact that we are struggling with the number of strains. There is roughly about 3 strains that are circulating in South Africa at the moment. But I will say this, it's a certain provinces that are actually high risk or having a major spread in South Africa, especially in the eastern parts of the country that are bordering closer to the game reserves. And I think that's what makes this time around so different. The last peak, we had about 7,000 cases. Now we are at over 20,000 cases. That's exactly that scale of the impact of it.
Right. Maybe just going deeper into that conversation on the scale, maybe just speak to us about the real economic cost that we're seeing in South Africa when it comes to export losses, when it comes to farm incomes, and also the downstream industries. When we talk about feed suppliers, abattoirs, and logistics, what are we seeing in those sectors?
I think the core point, and Mr. Bai will add on this, is that in South Africa, when you look at the livestock industry, the beef side of it is valued at around 68 billion rand, and you have around 24 billion rand on the dairy industry. We see the major impact at the moment in the dairy industry, the KwaZulu-Natal province. That's the hotspot of the disease in South Africa at the moment. We see then, of course, the losses there because the output that the farmers in the dairy industry are receiving has declined quite significantly. But also, while we have a largely commercial agricultural sector, there's still a number of auctions that has to happen for all of the cattle to end up at the major feedlots. The drying up of those, of course, does reduce the cash flow for the farmers. And that's the one aspect that we're seeing this impact on. As to whether then there will be major mortalities or not, that's something that will be clearer over time. But my sense, at least even with us then in government and the agribusinesses, we are seeing is that at least we may be succeeding on procuring the vaccines that we need. So this is all, Denver, to say that economic impact, yes, at a farm level, but at a broader scale of the farming economy, it's not yet as significant. But for individual farming businesses, there are some that are hardest hit by this.
All right. So a couple of snapshots there from the epicenter. Mr. Mbai, maybe just back to you. What are then some of the possible knock-on effects that Namibia could be looking at? What are the likely as far as supply chains and the trade flows?
Yeah, Denver, it's a billion-dollar question. So the possible implications, of course, is movement paralysis, whereby we have some restrictions of movement of animals, be it in the specific regions where the outbreak might occur, or even to limit exportation of our livestock into the South African economy.
Right.
But to look broadly at it is that on average we export between 140,000 to 200,000 winners on an annual basis. And once we hit that movement paralysis, it's basically a right out loss of income for the local economy as a whole. And I think what is also important that one needs to put a lot of emphasis on is the loss in the trust capital. I think as a country, we've negotiated and maintained the FMD status, and that created ample opportunities for our livestock farmers to export, be it cattle and sheep as well, to different markets and other byproducts that emanate from these livestock that we've mentioned.
So you're basically talking about the country's status and the reputation. How hard is it to regain that once that starts to become into question?
Because the bottom line is the consumer. I think one has to maintain consumer trust within these lucrative markets, and that process in itself can take a number of years, anything from 2 to 5 years, depending on how we manage, the outbreak should it hit our side.
Exactly.
And maybe just a bit of a dimension to what I've talked about is the fact that we are net exporters of beef. I think looking at the number of animals that we have within our country, cattle specifically, we have about 2.5 million cattle, about 2.4 million sheep. And the goats varies from 1.9 to 2 million as well. And all these, animals need to find a market somewhere. Right. I think either through live exportation or processed products.
And what something like FMD does is it closes those borders, it holds the abattoirs or backlogs them. And maybe talk to us about that, because we often speak about the higher prices that we're expecting in beef prices and in dairy prices. But then there's also those elements, the risk of oversupply in the local market, the auctions that are on hold, the abattoir bottlenecks. How are we prepared to face that? Are we diversified enough?
Yeah. So obviously, when you have movement paralysis, as they put it, right, we will then end up with a situation whereby you have an oversupply. Right. Now, with that oversupply, obviously, the knock-off effects is on the price reduction. But if you look at the abattoirs, then they'll have to incur extra cost, basically to store these products, let's say beef products in this specific case. So, and I think as an economy-wide impact, it's actually devastating, because that might lead to job losses altogether, a reduction in disposable income. And of course, there might be some, limited spending on the specific commodities in question.
All right. Mr. Slobo, we are speaking about a hypothetical situation in Namibia, but obviously in South Africa, it's pretty real at the moment. Are there any specific export markets that are most sensitive to the foot and mouth disease outbreak? And maybe also, how quickly can an outbreak translate into cancelled contracts and long-term loss of market share?
Denver, what I would say is that what Mr. Mbai is putting forward, is something that Namibia should try to make sure that they remain in the clean status that you are in. You guys enjoy market access in the EU and the other areas where we don't participate, in part because of some of these diseases. It takes time to regain a market when you have lost it. It could be 3 years, 5 years. It depends on a market by market. But I'll say this, we are fortunate at the moment because most of the markets that are in the Middle East, we have been able, like Jordan and the others, and we are still in continuous discussion with the others, so that they know that if we have vaccinated the animal, they can be able to take that meat. There won't be any constraints on that. And I want to put this forward very clearly, because for consumers in South Africa, in Namibia, across the region, there are no consumer risks related to foot and mouth product, vaccinated or otherwise. But of course, it does weigh on the animals over the long run. So there are no risk on the for the consumers. But the perception, which is what Mr. Mbai was referring to, is something that we always have to watch. But I think to your point, unlike Namibia, where you guys have already been for a long time a net exporter of livestock and the beef products. South Africa, it is only just in the last 8 years or so where we've been trying to punch above the weight in terms of being a net exporter. And we now have to vaccinate, and we have a large cattle herd, around 12 million head of cattle that we have to vaccinate. We aim to vaccinate everything. And of course, our slaughtering rate a year is around 2.7 million head of cattle. Some of that is what we'll get from Namibia. The core thing then now is about Namibia remaining clean as it is, so that we can be able at least to absorb some livestock that is unaffected from Namibia and be able to utilize in the abattoirs in South Africa to keep the meat supply running across the region.
The impact of this current outbreak seems to have reached throughout the regions, throughout Southern Africa. And just to stay on that question of reputation, what are the real risks as far as the Southern African region getting labeled as like a high-risk livestock zone by global buyers? And what would that mean for long-term agricultural investment?
You know, any problem of this magnitude obviously also presents some opportunities. I think within the realm of the AFCFTA agreement and the trade opportunities that emanate from that specific agreement, there's a possibility for us to engage, you know, in markets like my colleague Wandile talked about, that are less strict in terms of the requirements. Right. So the long and short of it is that we can identify avenues for commodity-based trade, you know, within the African continent, and also to realize, you know, that the producers don't suffer much losses in terms of the impact of keeping these animals for a longer time, and obviously to create an opportunity.
All right. Mr. Silobo, would you like to weigh in on that, just the impact on the Southern African region and that reputational risk there?
At Denver, as much as I want us to be strict on ourselves, and we should, and make sure that biosecurity is priority, but I will say this, a number of countries across the world do suffer with foot and mouth disease. We have what we call the SAT strain in Southern Africa region, but in Europe, they've had their own difficulties. In fact, one of the countries that have had to vaccinate their entire cattle herd is Argentina, and Brazil and the others have gone down that road. But I think what is important for us is to ensure that we get rid of this disease in South Africa, so that other countries that are not relying on vaccination, but they have a robust biosecurity like Namibia, Botswana, and the others, they remain in that way, so that the strict markets in the EU, you are able to exploit those markets, while at the same time, the less strict ones, either in the Middle East or otherwise, we are able to participate. Because I think the core goal is to ensure that the Southern Africa region is robust on biosecurity. We're talking now about foot and mouth disease, but at some point we'll be talking about plant and crop diseases like we had dealt last year with the Gos wilt. The key thing is about biosecurity to be solid in the Southern Africa region, and I think we should strive for that.
All right. That actually brings me now to the question of cooperation. And Mr. Mbai, maybe to you, are we seeing any policy gaps here as far as the collaboration within the region, or what's your view as far as that? How satisfied are you with the way that the region is collaborating?
Yeah, it's an interesting question once again, because there are provisions within SADC, the SADC trade protocol, basically to deal with aspects relating to transboundary disease control and disease management as well. But the issue is that, as you are fully aware, is that some of these borders are quite porous, right? There's free movement of animals, right, and to some extent also human beings and so on. So on that aspect, I think there's a need for a real action, right, to ensure that we come up with some interventions to curb any potential impacts of this, I'll call it devastating economic disease, right, altogether. But on the other hand, also, I think one needs to look at the possibilities for us as a nation, to look at coming up with so to say, almost close to permanent, interventions, basically, so that we don't deal with these issues. Once
Piecemeal.
it's close, I wouldn't want to use that terminology. We deal with these issues before it reach our shores, and also we create an avenue to manage it effectively. And the same goes for other natural calamities like drought and so on.
Right.
There should be, a budget allocated on an annual basis. If we have a good year, be it, right? If we don't have an outbreak of FMD, be it, so that we build enough, a buffer to deal with any eventualities.
So, but always expecting something like that. Like you just mentioned, it's often stated that outbreaks don't really spread because of the disease itself, but because of weak enforcement and informal livestock movement. How big a role does informality play in escalating a crisis like this? Again, maybe to both of you.
Yeah, the informality. I'm one of those proponents that strictly advocate for formalization of markets. Not necessarily for the sake of controlling the specific market or the specific market, the informal market, but to create an avenue and understanding as to how that specific market is basically functioning, and also to create some, solution, loops, because you'll then have low-hanging fruits to touch on once an outbreak is ascertained.
Okay.
But having said that, the informal market in itself, it's a billion-dollar industry or a subsector altogether.
Sure.
So it needs urgent attention. It needs some formalization. It needs some coordinated strategies to ensure that it contributes significantly, to the Namibian economy as a whole, and of course also our neighboring countries.
In the neighboring countries, yeah. Mr. Slobo, anything on that?
No, Denver, I agree with Mr. Mbai, because I talked about South Africa having about 12 million head of cattle. If you look at that, about 7.2 million is in the commercial space. But then you have, give or take, 5 million cattle that are in the smallholder and some informal townships and the other areas. And exactly as you were saying, the movement of people, as well as people moving the animals, is one thing that actually passes on these diseases. And I think that the better handling of the livestock and investments into the fencing and making sure that we are able to limit the movement or manage well the movement of cattle will be important one. But I think at the core of it, Mr. Bai, you are right in a sense that some budgetary allocation, both for research but also for reserves of times of difficulties are there. Here in South Africa, for example, one of the difficulties we fell into was the fact that we let our vaccine developing entities actually lose its capacity over time. Now it cannot produce the vaccines that we need. And I'll tell you this, to buy these vaccines that we need a year, it will cost us roughly 3 billion rands a year. And we need them to be multiplying this by 10 years in order to be able to get through this.
So then speaking about, just taking it from the agribusiness perspective, are farmers realistically equipped, whether financially or operationally, to now deal with some of the controls that they now have to put in place, the level of biodiversity that is being demanded of them? Or is this another case where, the burden on small producers is going to become overbearing?
No, I would start on this and say in the South Africa side, of course, the government will take the bill in large part when it comes to the vaccines. But on managing then the biosecurity, I would say the farmers, to a certain extent, they are well equipped on saying how to move with it. But the difficulty is, again, I'll go back to Mr. Mbai's initial point of saying once you limit the movement of animals, then that has a cash flow impact. And then that spills down then on what happens to jobs and, of course, in their financial situation. So a conversation between agribusinesses, the banks and the farmers, that's another conversation that is already taking place here in South Africa, which is why, at least on our end, we are trying to make sure that we can contain this in here. It will be very terrible for us to see it going to Namibia, because then if it goes to Namibia, you are then affected by the supply of animals that you want to get from Namibia to South Africa.
Maybe then just in conclusion to both of you, if you're a commercial farmer right now, a processor, or even an investor who's watching all of this unfold, what should be your top 3 priority risk considerations right now?
Yeah, the very first one is, of course, compliance. with regard to movement control. And then the second one is also a key priority is to ensure that there's a level of confidence in the systems and processes that has been put in place, and avoid any over-exaggeration of potential impacts. And then, of course, finally, I think this effort or our quest for stamping out this disease, if possible, calls for a joint collaboration, joint effort. And I think I always talk about the involvement of the mining sector in the agricultural subsector.
All right.
It's critical and it's important that all the other sectors come on board and assist the agricultural sector to move forward.
All right. Mr. Slobo, from your side?
I would agree fully with Mr. Mbai, and only just close it by saying again, to consumers, it's very important that the assurance is there that suddenly people don't move away from dairy or beef products because they are fearing the food system across the Southern Africa region remains intact. So people shouldn't move away because of these diseases.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight, both of you. And yeah, may we survive this outbreak.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Indeed.